Welcome, everybody. This is a very exciting moment. We're really excited to be welcoming Professor Libby Osgood from the University of Prince Edward Island for our 3M National Teaching Fellows Seminar Series. This is the first seminar in this series, so thank you for being here. Thank you for your interest in this series. This is being put on in collaboration with the Faculty of Engineering and Architectural Science. And so I'm part of the Center for Excellence Learning and Teaching. Our center is really sort of a teaching hub at Toronto Metropolitan University. So we're here to support instructors at TMU through teaching development and consultation, through curriculum development enhancement, and through creative approaches to learning and teaching. So if any of these things interest you, or if you're interested in having a conversation about teaching and learning, please feel free to connect with our team, and we'd be happy to support. This is a series focused on the 3M National Teaching Fellowship and folks who have received that fellowship. So if you're not familiar with this fellowship, it's Canada's most prestigious recognition of excellence in educational leadership and teaching at the post-secondary level. Fellows who receive this award embody the highest ideals of teaching excellence and scholarship and are committed to encouraging and supporting the educational experience of every learner. Here at TMU, we've started this seminar series to offer folks at TMU a unique opportunity to connect with fellows. This is being organized by us at CELT in collaboration with various TMU faculties, in this case, the Faculty of Engineering and Architectural Science. And the goal is really to inspire you and empower you to help you gain insights into innovative teaching practices and cutting-edge research on teaching and learning in higher education. Our first speaker in this series, like I mentioned, is Professor Libby Osgood. And Dr. Osgood is an associate professor in sustainable design engineering at the University of Prince Edward Island in Canada, and a religious sister of the Congregation of Notre Dame de Montréal. She is an aerospace engineer who worked on 2 NASA satellites as a systems engineer with orbital sciences. Dr. Osgood holds a PhD in mechanical engineering from Dalhousie University and is a member of the 2024 cohort of 3M National Teaching Fellows and the International Federation of National Teaching Fellows. At the University of Prince Edward Island, she is the engineering academic advisor, chair of the curriculum committee, and faculty mascot of the Engineering Success Center. Her pedagogical research is on humanitarian engineering, social justice, and design. She's also published 2 theological books on sustainability and the intersection of faith and science. We're really excited to have Libby here today. And maybe I'll pass it over to Medhat if you want to share any words from the FEAS side of things, Medhat.
It's really, thank you, Jack. It's really an honor to have you, Libby. It has been a pleasure meeting you earlier and talking to you a few weeks ago, but it's a great honor to have you again with us and speak to our colleagues. So thank you to all our colleagues from engineering and from the whole university, and I'm sure you will have a wonderful session. We have a wonderful speaker, so I am sure we will all enjoy the talk. Libby, the floor is yours, or the screen is yours.
Thanks, Medhat. And Libby, as you share your screen, I'll just quickly mention if folks could stay muted during this session. If you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat, and I'll make sure that's answered at the end of the session. We'll have a quick Q&A at the end. But otherwise, Libby, feel free to take it away.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Jackie. Thanks, Medhat. This is so, I'm so excited to be with you all today to get to talk about collaborative classrooms and how do we engage students more. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm on the, from the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Mi'kmaq people here in Mi'kmaqui. Yeah, we can jump right in, but let me say, if you're the sort of person that enjoy the engagement, and it looks like the chat is already buzzing, so please feel free to pop things in. And yeah, I do love a collaborative space. So if you would like to put things into chat as we're going along to add your own experience, I recognize there's probably a lot of wisdom in this room, and there are things you've already tried. So if there's things I'm suggesting and you've got a thing that you do, put it in there for people to be able to see. If you're the sort of person that's distracting to you, ignore it and just listen and pay attention to the slides. And then maybe afterwards you can go back through the chat and see some of the other good ideas that come. I called this talk, I used to teach engineering, now I teach students, because, well, I'll get into the story, but basically that was a huge part of my 3M application, was the recognition, the slight shift between seeing myself as an engineering teacher, especially because our profession, it's so professional, right? Like the emphasis is so much on protecting public safety and preparing students to be the ones to do that ethically. That it's so important. We often see ourselves as gatekeepers or as enabling students, preparing them with the engineering. So I really did honestly see myself as I'm an engineering prof. And after an experience I'll get into, I realized, no, I don't teach engineering, I teach students. And when we switch ourselves to more of a student-centric realization, suddenly it becomes not about conveying topics and saying the thing, I said it, so you must understand it, but it moves to how did they hear it? And it's that age-old, do I teach or do they learn? Which is our focus. And I think focusing on the students moves us to that, but are they learning? And when we can shift to that, it I think it improved everything I do as a teacher. And I still use the word teacher, but the emphasis for me still is on them learning. What you see here is this is one of my students, and she was last year's 3M Student Fellow, and the Success Center that we created to be a help center for students to come seek support in peer-to-peer learning, but also 3D printers and all the fun stuff. So they offer all kinds of workshops of co-curricular things that they feel aren't being covered well in the curriculum, or they're really engaged with and want to learn more. But I just, we can't be talking about students if we don't have at least one image of a student. To start with this, I want to say, I think we assume a lot about our students. We look out into that space and they're tired, they're this, they're that. I was in class last week and giving what I thought was a really good overview on something we were going to do. And I saw a couple of them kind of chatting and smiling and giggling. And of course, my head immediately went to, oh my gosh, is my shirt tucked in? Like, what's wrong with my face? What's happening? And I, of course, assume they're talking about me or smiling about something when it could be so many things. So I just want to encourage us to recognize when we're making an assumption about what we're sure our students are doing, and then maybe to rethink it. For one, how many of our students are super tired? You see them like sleeping and you figure, oh, they were up all night playing video games. Like that's such an easy, maybe this is just me and I'll own that. But I do think that because some of them do tell me that. So some of them it's true that they're like, oh, sorry, I was up till 4 a.m. on such and such a game. But for many of them, I don't know if it's the same in Toronto, but at least in PEI, many of our international students spend 2 nights a week at least stocking shelves to be able to afford their education, working up to the number of hours that the federal government allows. So there's a number of our students who are literally coming to class not having slept yet on a weekly basis. So if you notice some of the students act really different one day of the week than the other two, there's a really good reason why, very possibly. Um, the other thing, so this is where this story comes in. As Jackie mentioned, I taught for a number of years, and then I went off and became a sister of the Congregation of Notre Dame and went off to this nun boot camp, the novitiate. And when I came back as a teacher or as an engineering prof. And my first couple of classes back, I had first year students. It was a statics course. We teach sustainable design engineering here, which is very mechanical heavy, very systems oriented, and of course, sustainability. And we get to do design every single semester. So students work on individual or work on projects in teams of 4 to 5 for community partners. They each have their own individual clinic partner for second, third, and fourth year. So it's essentially 4 years of capstones. Which is so much fun to get to teach. So we really emphasize the professional aspects of the program, trying to be sure that they're on time, trying to be sure that they come prepared, things like that. So at the beginning of this one status class, especially with first years, set the tone early, you know, I was taking note of who was in the room, and one student came in late. And it was the third class. So by then I had kind of figured they should be on board by now. They know my expectations. So at the break in our class, I very quietly walked up to one of them and said, you know, I see that you were late, and I just want you to know, you know, it's important that you be here on time. And I saw, so please be here early, or please be here on time. And the student said, oh, I'm really sorry. My parents kicked me out. So I was sleeping on my friend's couch, and my phone died and the alarm didn't go off because I wasn't able to grab the charger before I left the house. So I'm sorry. And I was just like, oh no, I did that wrong. I did that so wrong. Because I came in assuming they just chose to be late. They were lazy waking up, or, you know, whatever those things are that are so easy for us to assume. Meanwhile, they're living this really big life struggle, and they made it to class. Like, whoa, that's huge. So I offer this perspective as almost like a pedagogic, a compassionate pedagogy to say, before, to encourage you, before you do a thing or reinforce a rule or things like that, maybe start with a broader assumption of what may or may not be true, because we just honestly have no idea. And it was that moment that I realized, oh, I really thought I taught engineering, but now I teach students. And so my perspective on how I treat the students has changed. It doesn't mean I don't have expectations. I do expect them to come on time, but my conversation with them has changed from starting with my expectation to saying, hey, you know, what's going on? Is there a reason that you weren't able to be at class on time? Or, you know, to kind of soften it, as opposed to coming in so hard all the time, allowing space for different reasons. So I want to take a second just to open it up here. If you know how to use annotate slides, if you see at the bottom left corner of the screen, there's a little pencil there. You can click on that and like throw a sentence in, or you can put it in chat, or you can open up your mic. But this is the only interactive bit I have, just so for all of you, for planning purposes for the rest of it. But I'm curious, what else might we assume about our students? What are your, oh my gosh, they're laughing at me, my hair must be funny moments of, because I think that's really relatable. I think that's something we do whether or not we realize it. So I'll just leave a second here. If you want to put something in the chat or try the annotate function. One of the great things about COVID was we all got to know Zoom a lot better. We all got to use like learn different pedagogical techniques. And I love this annotate one for when I do have to do online learning on our snow days. Oh, thanks, Jackie. Yeah. What else might we assume about our students? And maybe you don't. Maybe if you don't think you do that, that's something to start considering. What are the inherent assumptions that you make without realizing you're making them? Oh, thanks. They're coming in. Chris says, one assumption, their time availability and ability to manage time is similar to our availability and skill. Oh, you're so right. How can we expect them to come in understanding how to schedule stuff as 18-year-olds, right? When we've had how many years to figure that out? The annotate, it might be a different thing in different places. Sometimes it's on the bar at the bottom, but it's an option if you want to try annotation. I have a Mac, so you might have a PC and it might be a little bit different. Crystal says, do I have it? Yeah, annotation should be enabled, but if not, please use the chat. Sorry about that. Crystal says, I learned this during COVID and seemingly forgot. Oh, the annotation, I'm sorry. Yeah. Alyssa says they are not prioritizing the class when not doing well or showing up. Yeah. I don't know about how many classes your students have. We have 6 classes plus labs every semester for our students. So we all think our class is their top priority. And that's not fair, right? That's not fair for that to be assumed. So are we using our learning management systems well to ensure that the deadlines are super clear so they know what deadline they're working towards for their different assignments? Are we communicating well enough to make it easy for them to prioritize what we're doing? Lin Ying says, I assume that they would know to reach out to their instructor, but most of the time they don't. Yeah, let's be really honest about that they would know to reach out to you. If you think about some of the experiences you had with profs in your time, or even your colleagues, how many do you feel comfortable talking to versus the ones that you don't? So I think it does take students time to know who can they trust, who is someone that will hold their truths well, or just say, well, you have to figure it out, right? And then the actual mechanism of how do you want to be communicated with? How do you want students to reach out to you? Is that through the learning management system? Is it through email? Is it through, we use Basecamp for a lot of our communications in the design groups. I'll just do a couple more and then move on, but I love how many assumptions there are here. Curtis says, I once got really frustrated with a student in the front row, slouched and typing furiously on their phone. I made a comment and shocked, he turned the phone around to me and said, I'm taking notes. Oh my gosh, I love that story. How many of those moments do we have as teachers where we're like, and you put me in my place, thank you. I am reframing how I think. That's fabulous. Okay. Assumption, they need the shortest way to score high grades. Yeah, Medad, like sometimes they really, really are trying. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're being smart engineering students and being efficient with trying to get all the coursework done with all of their classes. So they're not all aiming for the 100, but many of them are genuinely trying, right? So sometimes it's not shortcuts, sometimes it's efficiency, but sometimes they're genuinely trying. And let's acknowledge the power dynamic. It's scary to talk to your prof when they control your grade. How many times do you hear a student say a thing and it sounds like an excuse, so you just want to dismiss it, right? And how many times is it a really legitimate thing? So for the students to be able to navigate that takes advanced skills. Okay, I love all of these. I think I'm going to move on. Okay, yes, I'm going to move on, but I hope that we maybe save the chat, Jackie, if that can be like some of the things that we can send around afterwards, if people would like the slides or some of the chats, because I think we don't need to keep the names on them, but some of these suggestions are fabulous in terms of, yeah, we assume a lot. So how do we do better? So what I'm going to try to do now is to get into some of the evidence-based things, research that I've worked on to offer this more collaborative space for students. One of the things that I looked into is it was an article originally by, I'm not even going to say their names poorly because I will. So the two people on the screen, the two names on the screen, they spoke about this person or thing oriented. And this comes from the Journal of Engineering Education. If you're not familiar with that journal, I love it. It's got so many really, they're very, very competitive and only accept about 10% of the articles that are given to them. So when it gets there, you know it's like high quality research. And they have some really interesting qualitative work as well, which I appreciate that broader perspective. They talk, so in this study, it talks about how frequently it is for engineering students, particularly, to be very interested in the thing that they're building. And this might be more true for mechanical students. I am from more of a mechanical frame. But I think it's true too about like chemical and the process that they're working on, or the thing is easier to get your mind around than the person who's actually going to use it. So one of the things that I did with a first year class was we developed this gaming table for people with disabilities. It was a short first year project, and it developed into this much bigger, longer project, summer project that two research students took on to continue. And we started this study I had them do weekly structured reflections, just what did you do this week? And the study that I have taken on since is in their reflections, how person-oriented or thing-oriented are they for that particular week? And we were able to correlate it. We did this deeply for 2 students, and then I continued to do that for over a couple of years for my second-year design students. So I have, 100 students or more of like 13 reflections or so. So anyway, I'm drowning in data currently going through it, but looking at are they person-oriented or thing-oriented? The way that we can engage our students, I guess I'm showing this example that as teachers, our research, or as pedagogical researchers, our classrooms can be our laboratories. This is where we can get inspiration to, if we're interested in something, like I'm interested in the person versus thing, well, how does that impact the class? And so that has become a part of my scholarly work, that it feeds itself, and then it turned into summer research opportunities. And now later on, there are different research students who are working on that initial work. So in addition to your technical research, I just want to offer, there's so many opportunities to explore a cool thing in your classroom that maybe it's just one little thing that you're interested in, but go ahead and do the ethics approval and study it, because those can really be fascinating. And I will say this year, the American Society of Engineering Educators or engineering education is coming to Montreal in June. And the Canadian Engineering Education Association, CEA, has moved their conference to just before the American one. So in a 10-day period, 8-day period, there's going to be like thousands of people, engineering educators talking about this stuff. So the dates have passed for the papers, but I highly encourage you to go if you want to just be immersed in, oh my gosh, there's so many people talking about so many things. The next thing I want to encourage you to do is, when you have a guest speaker come and you have to sit in the chair and then you're kind of like wobbly after a good 15, 20 minutes and you're like, well, it's just because I'm older than them. Or you're sitting there kind of thirsty, getting antsy, you start to check your email on your phone. I really encourage us to physically sit in our students' seats, like, walk a mile in their shoes, but physically sit in their seats for as long as you can possibly be willing to. Is the font big enough on the screen? Can you even see the screen? Is there a big thing in front of it, a big barrier? Can you hear well? Like, I think just sitting in our student seats once a semester really helps to give us perspective on what their experience is like. And if you're having a busy day where you've got meetings ahead and your brain is on other stuff, yeah, ditto. That's for them too. So I think the more that we can bring empathy into our practices and more literally understand what they're going through, it's going to make us better teachers. We're going to present things differently. We might start to use bullet points at the end of a set of slides to say, okay, key takeaways. My first year teaching, at the end of the semester on my SOTS score, here we call them SOTS, the feedback was write bigger. Oh my gosh, wouldn't you have told me that day too? Like, wouldn't this have been better for everyone had you told me this day too? So I love that example because it's like, oh, I could do that so easily. So one of the things that I like to do when we talk about, we're moving into like co-creation pedagogy here, or students as partners. How do we elicit feedback from students in a good anonymous way that gives constructive feedback to us, and it lets the students know that we're in this with them. The game is not we're the barrier and we're deciding whether or not you move on. The game, I talk about engineering as this is a team sport. I'm here to help you get through this course, but there are standards that you're going to have to pass. But let's make you successful. How do we make you successful? So one thing I always like to do is I have a forms. It used to be Google and now it's Microsoft Forms link. That's just 100% anonymous. The question is, what feedback would you like to give me? How much does this matter to you? And How many people are saying this? Is it the whole class? Is it just you? Give me some perspective. And I mention it, it's at the top of my learning management system. And I mention it in class a few times to say, what do I need to know that I don't know? Or what needs to change? So it's not just having a thing, but it is reinforcing its availability. And I have found that for one, that takes away the power dynamic that the student can let me know. And it's very rarely abused. It's very rarely you suck or something that's just not helpful, right? It's generally very constructive. One other thing I recommend doing to the suggestion that our class is their priority, check in on major assignment deadlines if you can. Let's say you've got a midterm coming up or a giant project due. If there's a few of the students in the class that talk to you nicely and are willing to share things with you, check in with them to say, how many other exams do you have right now? Do you have another exam that day? That for one, they're going to perform better in the exam if they don't have two on the same day. And if that's the goal for them to study for your class, move the exam if you can, right? Like make it so that they can be successful because the goal is for them to learn. So if you know they've got a giant report the day before, and this is something you really want them to know, the students as partners moves into that co-creation of the course. So you are including them in decisions that don't matter, decisions that it doesn't mean anything to you either way if it's Wednesday versus Friday, but for them can make a really big difference in their learning. So if you can give up little bits of control of your classroom, I encourage it. And I find the students engage, not all of them, but many of them take that responsibility on well. Another one, if you've heard of Start, Stop, Continue, this is one that you can do with sticky notes, or I have an online form that I'd be happy to share with you that's already done. Start, Stop, Continue is what are the things I should stop doing? What are the things I should start doing? And what are the things I should continue doing? And what I really like about this is the continue piece, because that's the piece we don't often get feedback on. We don't often learn the things we're doing well that they like. But what I also like about that too is it's a very visual way for everyone to see the information if you do the sticky note one. And sometimes it's just on the board. I only do this about once a semester. You don't want to be over feedbacking the class. That can be really annoying. Sometimes they're just like, no, you be the teacher, do the class. So these are suggestions not to do all together all the time. But I like Start, Stop, Continue once a semester. And if you do it on the board on the way out, just write the big letters, Start, Stop, Continue, hand out sticky notes. And as they leave, they post it in the right places. And what you'll start to see is under the stop and under the continue will be the same suggestions so that they can then see, oh, but someone else likes that. That's why they do that. And you can, it's more information for you to make decisions. But I will say these sorts of pedagogical practices are courageous. You have to be brave to do this. And what that does is it shows them your vulnerability for a moment of being willing to learn, being willing to adapt. And I find showing that vulnerability encourages them to engage more. And anytime there's a survey, give them feedback. Let them know what other people said. You don't have to do all the hurtful comments or all the whatever. You can definitely filter out what is the important pieces of information, but let them know what each other said and how that guided your decision, because I do find that very, very helpful. Okay, last one for this slide is, if you've heard of universal design for learning, UDL, what are the practices we can do that will help everyone in the room, regardless, so that we get to the point where you don't need accommodations. Like you don't need individual accommodations because the room is inclusive or the practices are inclusive enough that they're not necessary. And the way that that can look in a kind of compassionate pedagogy is making policies that the boundaries are clear but expansive enough that you don't have to be the bad person all the time and being like the enforcer. So for example, one that I like to use is with the design courses, we have a lot of reports due. What is, they're I want them in on time. I want them to learn stuff. and for me to be able to grade it and get it back to them. So I say, if they turn it in within 24 hours late, 10% off. But that means each of those, oh, I was 2 minutes over. Oh, I'm so sorry, my internet dropped. Oh. I don't have to deal with it. Straight 10% off. We know this, that's okay. And then after that, my requirement is you must submit it, but I'm not grading it. So I want you to learn it, but I'm not grading it. And so I'm not saying that's the best policy in the world, but I have given a lot of thought to trying to address the number of different excuses that there are, to build in an allowance with a small penalty, but to say, yeah, stuff happens. If you choose to take the extra day to make it 100% better, that's fine. You just get 10% off, and a suggestion came in the chat about Mentimeter. Yeah, Mentimeter is really great, and it is anonymous. And so you can do that live in the classroom with a nice QR code that the students just hold up to their phones and get going, or type in. So yeah, there's some really lovely collaborative practices. But essentially, small changes really do lead to greater trust. So you don't have to do all of these things. Try one and see how that goes with gaining trust with your classroom, and see how that happens over time. So I think ultimately as instructors, we're trying to cultivate inclusive, respectful learning environments where students can flourish. And I don't know that I've ever seen a student look that happy or about their learning, but it would be nice. That's the goal. That's my goal there, is for someone to feel embraced in the classroom, that they can flourish, because it's not just about learning, it's about becoming the human that they're hoping to be, the human that they showed up at university to become. One of the research projects that I looked into recently was looking at accommodations across UPEI, and specifically asking students across, not just in engineering, what are barriers to your receiving support? And it was a really big study. And one of the questions, or two, were, if you had a particularly good experience with requesting accommodations from a professor, please tell us. Why was it positive? Or if you had a particularly negative one, tell us. So we got a number of really great small anecdotal stories to tell us, what do students define as good and bad? And so we created this spectrum of support, I guess you'd call it, where the most supportive things we can do for students in their classroom, there was a group that had no negative experiences with profs. They only had positive experiences. And then the next most supportive, which is unbelievable and cool, the next most supportive was the instructor initiated something to normalize requesting accommodations. And it worked its way down to some really, really tough situations where students only had negative experiences, or they felt completely dehumanized being locked into a room so that they couldn't hear the other students doing the test, or very different things like that. But basically, this will be coming out in SIA this summer, my student who worked on this. And we wanted to work on this to say, this is what students are telling us. So for example, this is their words, and we have permission to share this. This is ethics approved. And some of the negative things, students felt unsupported. And this person said, it feels unsurmountable to try to explain something like this to someone who is already clearly decided what's what. It feels unsurmountable. Like, holy cow, that's a big phrase. That's a big feeling for someone who doesn't feel like their instructor supports them. And that's with something like test accommodations, something small. Need for self-advocacy. Many of the students, so they said, I never confronted the professor about missing marks in case it made the situation worse. So these are things that are going on that we didn't know necessarily are happening. So when students don't give us feedback, that's not always good. That means they don't even want to engage. And I do want to highlight this one. Students talk. So if you are the sort of professor that is getting talked about, that can either be good or bad, that we noticed this in the data a lot, that a bad reputation develops. So one student said, I haven't personally had to deal with this situation yet, but I'm hearing that one of my professors might be denying us accommodations. This student goes on to say, so I'm going to have to fight. Like, this student enters the classroom assuming it's going to be a bad experience for them, purely based on what other students have said about that person. So you've already lost the trust of that student before they enter your class. So it's a lot harder to gain that trust back. And then so much so is dismissive. The professor simply refused to provide me with my accommodation. I had several meetings, a lengthy email, blah, 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 and invalidating conversation I had to get through was rather disappointing. They felt so invalidated that how can they focus on their learning if they don't even feel respected as a human, right? So I bring some of these up because they are evidence-based based on what we learned. But there are things that we can do that are good. So what were some of the good practices? One is universal design. If you haven't looked into that, that can be really, really overwhelming, but you can choose one thing from it to try to adopt. This person said, the professor made sure on the first day of class that he let all students know that there were going to be recordings of the class and that if anyone needed extra help to let him know. So if you're not particular about having your information recorded, that's a UDL moment where it's helpful to everyone, whether it's a student who English is their second language, whether it's someone zoned out in the middle of class. I don't know if you sit in faculty meetings, but there are definitely moments that I'm like, oh man, I missed that. What just happened? So depending on what you're comfortable with, if there's something that doesn't matter a ton to you, making that a universal practice helps everyone, helps elevate everything. And this I don't know what your accommodate system is like. We use the accommodate system, which we have to go in and say, yes, I acknowledge these are the students that have accommodations, and here's the accommodations. But this student talked about many of the students talked about how much good communication mattered. I really appreciate it when a prof will reach out before an assignment or at the start of a semester, acknowledging my accommodations. So even just an email saying, hey, I hear you have I just signed off your accommodations. If you have any problems or if you need any help, please let me know. Just acknowledging it. Since we did this study, I did that this semester. Oh, the reception was so good. And it took me 20 minutes to email each of the students, copy and paste to each one individually. And it's already fostered some really good things that I wasn't expecting. Now, I have to say this one is kind of in the bad column, but I need to say it. Students have such low expectations on what a positive experience is. This is in the particularly good experience. One person said, when I suddenly fell ill and was hospitalized, Professor such and such worked with my caseworker and allowed me to pause my work that was due during my hospitalization. Very accommodating. This student is thrilled because they didn't have to turn stuff in when they were in the hospital. Like, oh, surely we can be doing better, right? And yet they're not complaining, they're praising. So literally anything we can do to make it slightly better is great. And this wasn't only one response. We had dozen responses like this of anything, any help. So in the paper, we go on to say, so what are some best practices? But for the sake of time, and these aren't formatted well, this is a sad cut and paste. That these are things that we're recommending in the upcoming publication. Yeah, so I'm really just going through some of the different research I did here of different things that I think are important to focus on. As pedagogical researchers, our classrooms become our laboratories. And I think that is important to know. Ian, that paper that I mentioned is going to come out in CEA this summer. So please come to CEA. And but CEA's repository is incredible. If you haven't gotten into that, they're hosted at Queen's, and the repository has so many great tips in there from a Canadian perspective. This was early work I did about design projects, and I include this slide to show you. There are so many decisions we make when we do any sort of team project or design project. So for example, how big is the team? How do we select the teams? Where do we get the projects from? What are the deliverables? How long is the project? That these are all the things that we can really clearly vary. And if you're interested, pick one and research it. I think I'm probably saying that a lot because I think the more we get fascinated with our own teaching, the better we do, the more we put emphasis into it. So this was a paper we did in sustainability about how do you assess designability? What's one way that we might assess designability? Because I was like, well, if I'm a design prof, how do I know that they're doing it right? You know, how do we do that graduate attribute well to say, do they design better? I don't know. So that's what this paper was, one attempt to look at. And students really respond to when you're having fun in the classroom. This is one, I was teaching statics. I don't know if the sound is on, but I was teaching statics. I'll just turn the sound off. I was teaching statics and it's going to blow up. I'll warn you now. And they weren't getting distributed loads. So I said, listen, I'm bored. You're bored. Let's do this. So it was Thanksgiving time of year. And I went out and got a ton of pumpkins and a bunch of rubber bands. And our lab that time was learning learning what distributed loads are. So we did do calculations, assuming, you know, the strength of the elastic and all that kind of stuff. And I still have students come back to talk about that. I have done way better classes than that. But when learning can be fun, they engage more, right? Like every class doesn't have to be like that, but it is fun when they can be. The other thing that a lot of my research has focused on is stories. As engineers, because we're a professional, it's a professional program, our cubicle stories, as I call them, mean a ton to students. They really, really crave the real world. What's it going to be like for me sitting as an engineer? So if you have any industry or your research or any of that kind of experience, they crave that. So one thing, and it can help their engineering identity. So one thing I did, I'm jumping through examples here, was my experience was as an aerospace engineer, as it was mentioned, and I got to work on a couple NASA satellites, and that's at the control room, and that's cool. That's just a cool story no matter what, right? So I tried to bring that into the classroom. So I created this murder mystery based on a real scenario that happened. If you remember back 11 years ago, the Rosetta satellite it orbited around a comet and then landed on the comet. And all kinds of weird stuff happened. And it was this really cool, fun, crazy case of chaos and decision making and what happens. And so to try to bring that experience to the students, I ended up doing like it's a murder mystery. So all these different roles, each student inhabits one role, and they're given a booklet of data that they quickly digest. And they practice what it's like to be in a control room. Now, we're not aerospace engineers here, but they do get to then practice what is it like to live within a hierarchy. And I build in personalities. So for example, the JPL scientist was based on someone I worked with who would just sit there and ridicule everyone in the room. It was not helpful ever, but that was a human, right? So I wanted them to know some of the things that really do happen in the real world. Personalities. People have personalities. Another thing is the power person. Their family keeps calling them because their daughter is sick. And the power person is especially important to solve whatever the engineering problem is that they're solving. And this person, like, I hand out slips of paper at different times to keep the thing moving. And the power person just gets escorted out of the room at times. It says, leave the room, take a call. And the students are like, where'd power go? We need him. So then we get to work through what really happened and have these neat conversations about what the real world is like. And I find that that helps to normalize some of their team experiences too. Anyway, I also buzzed through a couple of other papers there of different ways that I've used story in the classroom because stories are powerful. They really do mean a lot. And oftentimes that's me on the left pointing one way and all of my students pointing a completely different way. That often teaching can be like that, right? That I think they're learning one thing and they clearly think they're learning, or they're actually learning a different thing. So that's helpful for us to know. So my advice as we conclude here, do just one thing. Like today, I admit I have a very passionate style of, oh my gosh, here's so many things, and it can be very overwhelming. But just try one thing. And if you might, study it because it can be really interesting and your students are really keen to help. I don't have much funding, any really, but the students often end up volunteering. That accessibility paper came from a student saying, I've been selected to be on a committee to rewrite the policy for accessibility or for accommodations, and I want to know more. So I mentored that student through the research process, and he's writing papers now and presenting papers on it. Actually, we did a paper for the St. Lawrence region last summer it was in Toronto for ASAE St. Lawrence region. So your students are keen to get involved. So I really encourage you to do that. So I leave you with, as instructors, we try to to cultivate inclusive, respectful learning environments where students can flourish, or at least that's my goal. And a good way to do that is by creating collaborative learning spaces that encourage them to engage and prove on a daily basis that you're worthy of trusting, that you want the best for them. And that can be hard to do, but it can be easy to begin with one thing. Yeah, so that's it. Thank you.